we have David coming up to introduce our a commentator, and so maybe you will get us started with all the good questions and with your reflections and so forth to kick off our conversation.
All right, but how about a round of applause first? What a wonderful, wonderful project. Speaking of impossibilities, we have asked this lovely lady over here to comply with the impossible task of responding to this impossible panel. Um, so Anna Lawrence is a JD candidate at the UB School of Law, an associate for Buffalo Human Rights Law Review, currently on trial team, and a fundraising chair for the Buffalo Public Interest Law Program. And I can't think of anybody else who would so willingly take on this impossible task. Anna, come on up.
Hi, thank you, David, for that very generous introduction. And I want to thank Professor Gardner, who asked me to speak and has been introducing some of these misinformation topics in our election law class this semester. So it's so interesting to hear about all your guys' fantastic work. And I really see a theme of law or law intersecting with almost everything you're talking about, either outright through policing and looking at white supremacist laws in India, or coming together in a way that it would have to be involved if we're going to change things. So, oh, sorry. When we start law school in our con law classes, in our constitutional law classes, everything starts with the Constitution, and that's true of many of our law classes. And if we go back to the Constitution, we see white supremacy within it, right? We see protections for slavery. And we also, I think, can think of democracy as an impossible project. No one knew if the American Revolution was going to work. No one knew if democracy was going to work. And in fact, many people were quite sure it wouldn't. But here we are. And ending slavery and then ending Jim Crow, overturning Plessy, getting Brown v. Board of Education passed, imperfect solutions though these were, I think also probably seemed impossible. If you were living in the era of slavery, certainly there were people fighting to end it, but also there were many people who thought there was no way to sustain the country without it. And we know that it was possible to end those systems, although of course we see the remnants of them today. So I think also law school is going through a shift right now. We're getting a little shaken up. I remember, so my constitutional law class was last June, and the day before the exam, the Supreme Court announced their Dobbs decision. And we got a frantic email from my professor who said, disregard that decision for purposes of the examination, because we'd have to change the whole thing. So, we're going through a time where we were quite sure, precedent was going to be precedent. And we thought we had a solid foundation that we now see is pretty shaky. And I think starting to introduce law students even more than we are now to where white supremacy still stands in our laws, and the roots of some of these things, of course, we already teach about slavery, Jim Crow, and the really important landmark Supreme Court decisions. But if we can do that even more and invite students to start thinking about when they go out and start lawyering, as we like to say, trying to end those systems. And also, I think, as these lovely panelists were talking about, sometimes we get stuck in, I'm a law student, I'm focused on the law, that's what I do. But being interdisciplinary and working with other fields is going to be, I think, essential in making any change in the law and in society in general. And then I just wanted to end my comments with, we just had a wonderful talk from Professor Caraballo for our Mitchell lecture series at UB Law, and he talked a little bit about how the Fourth Amendment and its search and seizure is actually a protection for the police rather than a protection for Black people. And I think it's so important to start interrogating the different ways we think about the Constitution and think about how white supremacy is still showing up. So thank you for allowing me to comment, and thank you, all of the panelists. It was great to hear from you, and I'll pass it back over to Professor Muller for questions.
So wonderful. Yeah, join us. That was a wonderful reflection. Thank you so much. So, audience, dear audience, the floor is yours. We are eager to hear, as I said, your concerns, curiosities, disbelief, compliments, questions, and so forth.
What are some ideas about other themes that you might pursue in future iterations of the course? Very comfortable things.
Yeah, great question. Well, let's see. I had mentioned the project has been running for 5 years, pretty much every year in lots of different forms, lots of different iterations. So we've done projects such as we had one that was a little bit tighter that was about decolonizing arts institutions. That was within the program in arts management. We've done a project ending discrimination more broadly with 25 students in the Honors College. That was a couple of years back. In our CSE 199 iteration of the course, it was making computing anti-racist. That was one of our projects. I think what I've remembered. In a course that Batsalano also took with me, our impossible project was forging the Afro future. That was within the context of a history course. Let me see.
English one, right?
Sorry?
You have one going on with the English.
Oh, yes. Well, the one that we're proposing for next year is ending linguistic injustice. That's programmed to be a cross between a professor in English and in learning sciences, working on critical computational literacies. So that's a really exciting one. I think that's pretty much, I think I'm missing one or two. Oh, we did a fantastic project also with a colleague in learning sciences. Actually, it's the only project we've ever done for youth that was a summer kind of supplemental education project for middle schoolers where we had them build a utopian world in Minecraft. And the project was very much about how 10-year-olds could figure out how to do this together in the Zoom space. And so we did the entire project virtually, playing both in a Zoom room where we were semi-virtually present and then also as avatars in the game space and looking at kind of thinking about what it meant to exist in these two spaces simultaneously. So our classroom was doubled. We had a Zoom classroom and then we had a physical classroom in digital space where avatars would be attending, and then in an embodied classroom, semi-embodied in Zoom space. And then at the very end of the class, we brought all the students into physical proximity, into physical space. And I don't know if you all are familiar with Minecraft, but the students had to build manually portals to their digital worlds and then walk through them. So they had tape and cardboard and it was incredibly challenging for them. But we were really keen to think about working with youth, both in the space of the imaginary. Not surprisingly, they were much better at it than we are, in terms of thinking about the complexities of building a world in which everyone belongs, and then also play in this kind of thinking about identity formation in digital space for youth and coming in and out of digital and virtual space. So I'm really excited about this, we're thinking about newer iterations of continuing to develop that project. Otherwise, all the projects have been on the university campus. But basically, the answer is there are an endless number of possibilities. It's actually completely unbounded. It's really a feature of the faculty participating in the work with the students and or the kinds of crossings that we do disciplinarily might inform the choices that are made.
And just on the Minecraft thing, in true experimental spirit or parental overreach, both Dalia and I put our older kids as subjects as well. So that was interesting.
Nothing like experimenting on your kids.
Wondering, taught it in 199, right, which is first year students. So it seems it's scalable to that audience, right? First years coming in that worked well for you. Because these are, fourth year students, right? So I'm just wondering, I like the model. That's one question. The other question in the first slide that we had, does the curriculum run alongside of your lectures? If you're lecturing on the topic, is there a curriculum that's with it?
Kenny, so Kenny's kind of been in the city in the 199 data. So Kenny, I'm going to give you question one, and maybe me and Atri could take question two.
Sure. So me and Vatsalano. So Vatsalano and I are in the process of reviewing how this worked in 199. Our 199 is slightly different. So we have 6 different modules, each for 2 weeks. So there's 2 differences here, and both of them I think are pretty major. And I'm not sure I'm able to suss out what the causes of what are. So one is we only have 2 weeks as opposed to a whole semester, and the other, as you said, is freshmen as opposed to upper level undergraduate and graduate students. I think if I had to guess, it's mostly the 2 week nature that obviously constrains what you can and can't do. But I think we've seen some pretty exciting successes there. I think many of the students, right, so part of the goal of the Impossible Project is as a starting point, I think as Aishwarya said, right? And so I think we've had, or I personally, let alone where they've gone elsewhere, I think I personally have had somewhere in the range of 15 or so freshman students who have come on and done research, oftentimes for 2 to 3 years after that on these topics with me. So in that sense, I think it's a success. I think whether or not there are other metrics of success, I think is something we're still kind of looking through in the data. But it certainly has opened the door for a lot of students who don't think of computing in this space to be able to do so. And I'm pretty excited about that.
I mean,
Yeah, as an instructor.
but I did like the exercises that we're doing. And then I see, I mean, the biggest thing that I think from that is that this is just a topic that our students wouldn't think about, and it's just putting it on their plate makes a big difference. I mean, I've seen some great ideas from students who will just I mean, they clearly thought about it or start thinking about this, and it just I mean, I think it's this is long term, right? They're just starting their career, and this is a thought that is gonna stay with them for a long time. And I think even if being like a couple of exercises, I think it just puts it on their plate.
And I'll just follow up really quickly. It also requires in our model that instructors like Marina are there to buy in without broader structural and for us to be allowed to teach these kind of things. So there's another level of this discourse, which is how does this affect not just the students, which I think is a really important part of Dalia's Impossible Project model.
Hi, thank you. First, I just want to commend you the complexity and the thoughtfulness in this. It seems like there's growth and stretch for everyone from student to faculty with group projects and content, and it's laudable. So I want to talk about or ask you a question about the challenges of social science interacting with computer science. So my own challenge with a partner of mine comes into the IRB space. So the mentality, in my rudimentary understanding, can be the difference between move fast and break things on the computer science side to an understanding of what that can do to people. So thinking about the protection of people so they're not broken by processes. So as these projects sort of come to the light of day and become things, how are you thinking about that balance? Because I haven't figured it out.
I mean, I wanted to think about your question for a moment, but then I did have one immediate thought that came to mind. Um, so forgive me, colleagues. I try not to make biased assumptions about my wonderful folks that I love very much. Actually, I've come to respect very dearly across all of these years of work. But one of the and in some ways I want to say to the students, sort of close your ears. But in the interest of, sharing, and breaking down hierarchies. I think one of the interesting, more recent discussions we had, that I think bears on the core of what you're getting at, is actually about grading systems, right? And we had this moment where I'm not sure why we didn't anticipate this or realize it, or even why it took us 3/4 of a semester to realize that in such a co-linking such a project, we had just very, very, very different understandings of evaluation, and actually not even just understandings, because I think that we all agree on the failures of assessments, the things that we probably agree on the ways we want to assess, the things we want to change about that. But we're also really steeped in our conventions and our traditions, in feel needing to respond to the expectations of our students and that sort of thing. So I think those are the reasons why, and my colleagues can jump in, but why we kind of didn't really realize this until a little bit later on. So for me, the sort of most marked difference is the focusing on on points for everything. So I don't want to say, I think my mind is going to analogy of thinking about turning experience into points as something that is breaking people in the way in which you're talking about it. And so I think what was striking to me is the way in which I think about evaluation and the flex that I build into working with students, and that I definitely can. I mean, there's a difference between small classes and large classes, but I'm really, really trying to figure out how to be able to evaluate my students and be as little punitive as I can. And that requires undoing a lot of the traditions that I myself have, ways in which I function in my classroom, especially when I'm holding together a large class, where my students cease to become whole people, right? And so how do I do that? Like, that's a process that I'm really, really committed to myself. And sometimes it can get fairly messy in the classroom. It requires a lot of care. So anyway, that we just had, it was, I don't know, a week ago that we had this moment of semi-incommensurability and had to begin to think about how to work through it. And it was this really, really beautiful moment, I think, of sort of mutual revelation. And I think there was this opening, or this spark, this potential for us to be able to really move each other through to somewhere better, right? Maybe empower ourselves to challenge these convention systems. Like we're not there yet, right? We just had this conversation, but I remember feeling, and my colleagues can say if they felt as well, but this sense of opening there. So it's not a direct answer to your IRB question, but I think it gets at something.
I will also probably not exactly answer your questions, but try to kind of address it like somewhat similarly.
Yeah.
So just as a quick background, I went into computer science, as many computer scientists do, because I didn't want to deal with all the pesky human issues, right? So it's like, I want to do my numbers, my math. So one of the great joys of working with Dalia and Kenny is by training a computation social scientist. So he already is what I call bridge person, right? So he's there to translate stuff for me, right? Which has been incredibly useful. The other thing but your point is exactly right. Like, how do you get students to realize that a row in your spreadsheet is a person? Like, it's like kind of that realization is crucial. I don't know if Kenny has something specific he could point out with that, but like at least in CSE 199, the idea was so we've been doing case studies. So this year was using Impact Pro, which is a tool, ML tool based on deciding which patient should get interventions because they need the care. And then they use insurance data to determine who should need the care, where the proxy was patients who need care are the ones who have seen the doctor more. And like getting students to think through like why that is not what it should be has been was one of the ways we've been trying to do it. But yeah, it's I don't know if Kenny has other anecdotes from 199 to kind of speak to that specifically, but that's one of the things. The way we try to emphasize this is really hammer down on the concept of proxy variables, right? So what you think you're measuring is actually not what you want to measure, and kind of getting students to kind of think about that more uh, is, I guess, in some sense, another impossible thing because we're trying to kind of change how students come in, right? It's again, I said my background's like, I've been taught on like you can model everything out, right? There's always a math model that will give you exactly what you want, right? And then realizing that, maybe not, right? And so then the question of like these things, like when you say, oh, it works. So the other kind of related thing, like for students, is like, oh, we're going to build things that helps everyone. And our counter is, who is everyone for you? And they're like, no, everyone. I was like, I'm going to build this app to kind of do da 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 da. And it's like, all right, who can use your app? Like those who have smartphones. Does everyone have smartphones? They're like, oh, and so kind of intentionally trying to kind of push back on some of these assumptions that we do know that they have because we have them, right? And so kind of, but it's also been really interesting to then realize our own, like my own shortcomings, right? The way I would assume certain things are true. There have been these discussions where Dr. Kim Bolden unfortunately couldn't make it today, and then we were talking to her about some of the projects, and she's like, and we were like, oh, this is like a nice project. And she's like, but that clearly doesn't work because da da da. And we're like, oh, right. And so,
Dr. Bolden is our assessment consultant. She's a PhD in education, so she's our education truly minted specialist. So she builds and helps us build transformative assessment. So rethink assessment for these kinds of projects because you can't use traditional assessments for this kind of project. So we were just spinning off a project to her, and she sort of shut us down real quick. It was brilliant.
yeah, so it's kind of we don't have like a foolproof way. We're just kind of trying out ways for students to kind of see where they are, and yeah, we'll see where it takes. It's as with all of these things, it's going to take time. And
Kenny, do you want to jump in? Can I just ask a question? I would love for think if we have a little bit more time for a question for the students. I would love to get them the opportunity to speak. But I actually could I start? Does somebody have a question for students?
Sorry.
No, I was hoping that I could. I hope I don't regret this, but I wanted to ask the students what their experience of us is.
Oh, let's take a different question.
like to clarify that,
From their side.
yeah, we'd just like to clarify that this is not going to affect their grades. So
Unless it's really
Uh, well, this is the only class where I spoke the most. So I was pulled out of my comfort zone. I don't speak much, but so I thoroughly enjoyed the process of the the way the classes are being conducted. So that's all I can say.
sorry, I'd just like to point out that this feedback actually is fairly common among us because they're not used to discussion-based classes, and there, at least anecdotally, there is quite a bit of support, like saying, "Oh, this was actually really nice. I really liked it." So,
Uh, Yeah, I would agree with Chaitanya and Professor because CSC students, if we are to interact, we would interact with the professor and ask if this is right or wrong, or just basic questions. But in this class, we interact with each other, with the students. We get to see things from different perspectives, and I think that in itself is a very rich learning experience. So and now listening to the professors, I realize that there's so much work that goes behind planning these classes. So yeah, I've been really liking this class.
So I have I actually had a similar question I wanted to learn how the students feel about education now versus how they felt about an undergraduate education before this experience. And also, someone mentioned in the panel uh, this notion how CS students or CS professionals think in terms of making stuff, and I'm wondering what it has been for those of you who are in the CS field to think about the importance of I'm making stuff as well.
So I think the first part of your question was how has it been different from undergraduate? I think the thing we struggled with the most was to question everything, because I think in the traditional way of education, we've been taught that this is the question and you have to figure out the answer. But in this class, it's been most about, okay, don't accept anything at all. You can question anything that is possible. And that in itself, I think, took us 14 weeks to, because our brain has been trained to think in a certain way in all these years of education. And then to break through that, that is where I think everyone in this course almost struggled with. And that's where I think the professors are really encouraging us to go beyond. Like, we would give them a solution and they would be like, but think more or like come up with more. And so that's been one aspect of it. And yeah, as CS students, even while building an ML model, we like, okay, we'll predict this, and then this will give you this result. And then because of the collaboration, we're like, okay, what can we do with this result? Is this actually solving a problem? Do we actually need an ML model at all for this? Do we actually have to make this? So these are some of the questions that we've been thinking about. And that's why it's taken 14 weeks and 15 weeks. And still, if it was a regular CSE project, I think we would have just submitted some model by now and shown some really good drafts. But in this course, we're actually thinking about, let's not repeat some historical patterns. If something doesn't need to be built, don't build it. So yeah, I think that's been helpful.
Adding to what Aishwarya said, uh, traditionally we were not trained to fail. So here we have been given the chance to contemplate, we have been given the chance to think through the historical lenses that we were equipped over these 14 weeks. And it's, although it is the impossible project in true terms, we have the courage, like we got the courage to uh, tell ourselves that it's okay to fail. It's the process that is more important than the end result. So in those terms, I think it's different than other classes.
All right, thank you so much. I think you wanted to say something else, right?
Yeah, I'm actually really like that question, y'all. This whole concept of undoing is something we've also just been learning about in class. Like, we are the ones that made these systems that are so flawed. We imagined them into existence. We can definitely undo them now, right? We have every single power to like reimagine a different alternative. So that's been something that's like been really messing up my brain in class, and I feel like I can't come to class on an empty stomach because it's, yeah. And that's something we've been trying to incorporate into our project as well. This idea of reimagining stuff into existence by going backward.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. A big round of applause to the panel. And we'll take a 15-minute break and come back at 10:45. Thank you so much. Good job.